officials are advising 11 million people at the centre of an outbreak of
Health
the new virus
authorities are still working to identify the virus behind
in the city of Wuhan, where the outbreak began, patients now in isolation, all trains and planes out of
This morning, I've declared a state of emergency in the province of Ontario.
The virus and controlled it and got rid of it for them. So we want to mimic that in people that haven't been.
Hello, and welcome to the 7th annual lecture of the Louis L. Odette Family Urban Angel Fund for Homelessness. I'm Emily Matthew. As a journalist, I've reported on issues that can lead to homelessness, including gaps in government policy that make housing increasingly precarious, and I'm so pleased to moderate this afternoon's discussion. Today, we are honored to have with us Dr. Jim Withers, a world leader in providing healthcare to those struggling to survive on the street and the need for a far more empathetic approach to medicine. After Dr. Withers speaks, we will have a discussion on the issues he has raised in his presentation with a panel of experts in homelessness and mental health. And we'll have time for some questions. To ask now at smh.ca. That's ASKNOW at smh.ca. We'll do our best to get to them all, and if we can't get to your question live, we'll follow up over email. This session is being recorded, and a link will be shared with you after the event. Please feel free to revisit the content and share it with your colleagues. To our registered attendees, we will be sending out a short survey, and we'd be very grateful if you just take a minute to fill it out. And now I'd like to turn things over to Dr. Tom Ungar, Psychiatrist in Chief at St. Michael's Hospital.
Thank you, Emily, and thanks to Dr. Withers and to all of you for joining us today for the virtual version of our annual Louis L. Odette lecture. And perhaps most importantly, thanks to the Odette family for making it possible for St. Michael's to present these annual lectures by distinguished speakers on issues around homelessness and mental health. I'm Tom Ungar, Psychiatrist in Chief at St. Michael's Hospital. Like Pittsburgh Mercy Hospital and Health System, where Dr. Withers is based, St. Michael's has an abiding commitment to caring for members of the community who experience disadvantage. So caring for the less fortunate is in our DNA here, and it's central to our mission. At St. Michael's, we've made breaking the cycle of homelessness a priority. At our mental health and addiction service, we support those living with serious mental illness and addiction, as well as poverty and homelessness. We have an interprofessional team that includes peer support workers, occupational therapists, and addiction counselors, as well as psychiatrists and social workers. We want our clients to have access to care when they need it and how they need it. And we want that care to be filled with compassion. I think it's no secret that COVID-19 has brought the homelessness crisis into sharp focus. When the pandemic hit, St. Michael's mobilized quickly. We reached out to those living on the street and in shelters to check on their health and test them for COVID-19. We opened 2 temporary shelters in the hospital's emergency department for those awaiting their test results so they could stay safe and away from the streets. With the help of our donors, we also ramped up our testing capacity at the hospital and provided vulnerable patients with hygiene kits and other emergency supplies. COVID-19 has made it clear how important it is to provide enduring health care for people who usually don't get care in a way that works for them. It's a huge challenge, but here at St. Michael's, we're known for taking on some of the world's toughest health challenges. And now, like you, I'm looking forward to hearing from our speakers and panelists.
Thank you, Dr. Ungar. And before I formally introduce Dr. Withers, we have another short video. It's about 2 minutes.
Pittsburgh has a lot of interesting terrain. There's bridges that people live under. There's riverbanks, alleys, abandoned buildings. So we'll go into a campsite under a bridge and we make sure that they're okay with us coming in. So you build trust with folks whose trust has been broken. It's just a very ongoing presence that tries to improve how healthy they are. It's not hard to go out to see them. It's hard going home at night and knowing there are people still sleeping out there.
That was slightly shorter than I had predicted, but I'm delighted now to welcome the 2020 Lewis L. Odette Lecture keynote speaker, Dr. Jim Withers. For more than 2 decades, Dr. Withers and his team have been taking healthcare out of the hospital and directly to people trying to survive in outdoor encampments, parks, and beneath local bridges. What began as a personal mission undertaken by Dr. Withers in 1992 is now Pittsburgh Mercy's Operation Safety Net, a globally renowned program that has resulted in care for thousands of people. Dr. Withers is also the founder of the Street Medicine Institute to help clinicians and communities provide similar models of care, and the creator of a Street Medicine Fellowship in Medicine, where future doctors are taken out on the streets of Pittsburgh and taught how to apply empathy to medical practice. Please welcome Dr. Jim Withers, part of the Pittsburgh Mercy Health System, assistant clinical professor at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. Dr. Withers.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. My thanks to St. Michael's, to the Odette family, and to all of you in Toronto and Canada for allowing me to speak to you. I've titled my talk, Go to the People. And this is going to be a little bit of a personal storyline because I feel that stories are the most important thing that we have with care for the people that we serve. And so I thought I'd just inflict a little of my own story on you guys. The title comes from something I saw on a wall in a hospital in Haiti. And when I saw those 4 words, they just encapsulated much of what I was seeking in my teaching career here in Pittsburgh. As I see it, one of the big problems in healthcare is the distance, not just the distance between people geographically, but the distance in realities between those serving and those who are served. We can have people going through our hospitals and their realities are really not honored or sought out. And so as a medical educator, I was very interested in this concept and how is it that we can cross the reality gap, if you will, between where we are and where the people are that we serve. This is, I call this the real Dr. Withers. This is my dad. As a child, I made house calls with him in rural Pennsylvania in his little VW. And I knew when we went into the homes of people that my dad really cared about them. And I also could see from the love that they showed my father that his concern and ability to come to where they were was really profound on them. And I could see that there was much more than just the medical things going on between him and the patients that he served. And that's one of the foundational concepts that I brought from childhood. When I was a medical student, I started a rotation on the child's cancer floor, which was a tough place to work. And we had a lecture the first day from an expert on professional distance. And she was very convincing. And when I came out of the room, it was about this little girl who had leukemia, and they were concerned that the staff was getting too close to her. So I swore that I wouldn't get close to this little girl, Akiba. But when I came out of the room, I didn't know what she looked like. And the first thing I saw was this little girl who said, "I know where we can steal popsicles." And before I knew it, we were in the back room chewing on our popsicles. And she asked my name, and I said Jim, and I asked hers, and she said, "I'm Akiba." And I thought, oh no, I've blown it all. But that little girl was a great teacher for me because it was indeed very painful to watch her suffer. It took me into an area that I'd never been emotionally or as a person. And yet being close to her, watching her and being with her through the hard times. I was one of 2 people that she allowed to hold her close to her death, was really something that convinced me that even if people are living a different experience than we are, one of the worst things possible is to feel alone and not to be have your reality recognized. So later, when I became a teaching professor at our hospital, clinical teacher, the gentleman, kind of similar to this fellow here, came into the service, and it was a cold winter. The storm was coming, and I barely met the guy, and he said, "You know, Doc, I got to leave. I got to go." And I was very concerned for him, obviously. He'd come in hypothermic before, and I could not convince him to stay. And he left that night, and I later learned that he froze to death. I heard some of the house staff referring to him as a bumsicle. And it was kind of a crisis moment for me, because we clearly lost our own humanity in being able to label a person who wasn't like us in such a way. And it was also very important for me to say, how can I get to know what the world looked like from this guy's point of view, from people like him? And so I began to think about using the streets as a new classroom, a place where I might learn, and where my students ultimately might be able to learn how to see through the eyes of a gentleman like this guy. The streets are indeed a different world. If you want to read a book called People of the Abyss, written by Jack London, it's a great plunge into homelessness that he made in 1905. But the people out there are suffering, and you can see from this slide that there's a great connection between health and homelessness. Losing your health is one of the major causes of becoming homeless. The other thing in this photo that speaks to me is the man with his back turned. I think he sort of symbolizes us. And even the pigeons in the picture, because when you start working with people that everyone else has judged and shamed, it's like they say, well, if you feed the pigeons, they'll just keep coming. Why do you do that? And so the stigma is there, and breaking with the medical system as it is to seek out people is a bit of a break from the culture that you're in, and I had to face that. So to do that, I needed a guide, and back in 1992, I was able to find Mike. Mike had been homeless himself for 6 years when he was younger, and I asked him, I would like to go out with you. Could I do that? He was taking blankets and food out. And he said, well, you know, they don't like doctors. And I said, I know, but that's pretty much why I want to go out. I really need to understand what's going on out there. And I told him the story about the guy who froze. So he said, okay, I'll take you out, but 2 conditions. And I'll change the language a little bit, but he said, don't dress like a doctor and don't act like a jerk. And so I went home and I found a book in the library, and it was on how to dress like a homeless person. There was a chapter. And so I'm in the backyard putting dirt in my hair and on my clothes. And my 3 little boys at the time came out and they said, Daddy, what are you doing? I said, I'm going to visit people who live under bridges. They said, why? Why do they live under bridges? I said, I don't know. Can we come along? I said, no, not this time. So I showed up, and Mike said, well, you've got the look. Let's see if you can keep up. And that really began in 1992, a whole new phase of my life. I would work in the hospital in the day, and at night I would sneak out with Mike. I didn't tell my malpractice carrier. I didn't tell the hospital. It was sort of a pilot study, if you will. And it opened my eyes up to the human beings that were out there. The view from the streets it was radically different. As soon as I began to sit down on the sidewalk with people, I realized that I had become virtually invisible to most of the people walking by, with the exception of some very disdainful looks that people would give to the person and myself. I like this picture because of the child, and I would just encourage you all to maintain that inner child that's able to see people that others have learned to ignore. And the other thing that I found particularly powerful was my view changed from one of, who are these people? Why do they choose this lifestyle? Why don't they, do X, Y, or Z? To hearing their stories and realizing, oh my gosh, they've been through so much trauma. They've been through so much pain. These are actually my heroes. I can't believe someone could just get up and face another day. And many times, as in this photo, people have found friendship, they found support, and it's almost like being in a war zone where they can't explain it to anyone else. But, when they needed that blanket, Larry gave it to them or whatever. And so to ask people to leave where they are and to come where you'd like them to go, where they'll be treated poorly, is a big ask. And it really changed my perspective, looking from the outside in. I heard stories very quickly about how much they hated the health system. One guy said, I'd rather die than go to the hospital. And I saw people who were dying out there. But at the same time, when I started making my visits, very quickly they called me Doc Jim, and I got referrals from this bridge to that bridge, and they showed me so much love. I got hugs more than I'd ever gotten in my life. And I remember a guy next to a campfire once watching me take care of a person's wound and said, he just started crying. And I said, what's wrong? And he said, I can't believe someone cares that we're still alive. And so it was much like those house calls my dad made. And I knew that this was an overwhelming situation. I wanted to run away from it sometimes when I saw what was out there. But I knew that as hard as it was to go out on the street, maybe at times, it was harder to go home and know that people were still out there. I'll just focus on George here for a second. George was one of my many professors. I thought of a lot of the people I met on the street as my teachers. And a guy named Grandpa was my teacher of patience, 80-year-old with schizophrenia. George here was my professor of You Better Respect Me. And so I really, really learned from George. He taught me how to respect him and to put myself in perspective as well. George was a little scary to some of the new volunteers at times, but he was rock solid. And one of the great joys in my life was when he began to call me brother. Well, George was a Vietnam vet, really tough. I thought I'd figured him out. He had alcohol problems, depression, racial, trauma as well. One night when we were sitting next to a campfire, though, he said to me, Doc, when I was a kid, our mother brought us into a room and she put a gun in her mouth and she shot herself. And we didn't know what to do. And we put her in bed and we tried to make her look okay until a grown-up came. I was shocked. I was just blown away. And then he changed the subject and he started talking about something else. But George had shown me a deep inner part of who he was. He had the trust in me to let me see that. And as a result, we just had a bond that couldn't be broken. We were able to get George off the street. He was able to get himself off the street, I should say. And so I thank him and all the others who allowed me to get into their lives. Pretty soon I realized that I was getting into a medical practice and I better start keeping records. Initially it was just a journal, but then I began having to do records with aliases, nicknames, tattoos, and things like that. I keep records. We had nurses that began to volunteer. And here I am writing a note to a guy and I'm saying, Bob, your doctor said he'll see you again Thursday at 2:00. And I realized, my gosh, I have a home care service for people under bridges. And the bridge in the background there sort of symbolizes, I think, the bridge that we were. And when you begin to look with people close to where they are into the health system that you're part of, you realize that it's pretty ugly and it's very difficult to get into it. And it doesn't treat you very well. And so it became obvious to me that we had a moral obligation to walk with them, to be their lawyer, if you will, to help them get into the services that they deserved and that were really not that accessible. So I call that process in-reach, and making appointments and walking people through things is really important. It also obviously was the classroom that I was hoping for, because students and residents began to come out with us, and they just loved it. You could see the energy coming back into their lives. I remember one student, after we worked with her for a month, said, Dr. Withers, I got my common sense back this month. And we have a waiting list of students for a year now to come out with us. And we're really proud of all the educational aspects. First and foremost is the well-being of the people that we serve. But I really think a close second is allowing the medical profession, the nurses and the PAs and the doctors in training to get their own humanity back. We have now over 35 medical schools who have street medicine, health science schools, I should say, who have street medicine as part of their potential curriculum, and 15 more that are in the works. And recently, as was mentioned, here at UPMC Mercy, we were able to devise the first known street medicine fellowship for graduating primary care residents. Dr. Cole was our first fellow last year, family practice, and Dr. Kotoff on the right is an emergency medicine trained fellow who's enthusiastically jumping in. Being integrated into the street has allowed us to be prepared for such crises. We think of homelessness as a chronic disaster, so we're always in disaster mode to some degree, but it positioned us with the trust of the people, much like St. Michael's, to be ready to respond, because we built that platform of trust. And so we were able to adapt our protocols and work with the people on the streets to educate them and prepare. When you know what's going on under bridges, then you know the nitty-gritty of what's needed. So these are very vulnerable people. If you look at the risk factors, homeless people are very, very high on the chronic list of illnesses. And even without COVID, the street homeless death median age is about 48 to 52. So we're really looking at people in crisis all the time. But with COVID, we really had to take it up a notch. And so we were able to get bathroom facilities and water. We used some political leverage of COVID, to be honest, to get some of these things done. Hand washing stations, et cetera, to really help the people. We were able to do COVID testing early on, and we've become better partners with the county and the city to now look carefully at all the shelters, et cetera. Housing is something that we're able to do because of our relationship. We've housed over 2,000 people in their own apartments here in Pittsburgh. It's wonderful to see people able to lock a door and have a key. But a lot of people, really are at high risk, and we just are there for them through the hard times. And a lot of them don't make it. I took this picture of this fellow nicknamed Froggy because I knew he was going to probably die, and he did. And it really bothered me. So in 1996, I got a check from someone, and I said, you know what, Mike, we're going to buy some plaques, and we're going to put them wherever someone died. They would say, we remember, and their name and the year that they died. And so we have our own memorial wall. This is actually a photo of people from a campsite. They've seen the name of their dear friend for the first time on the wall, and they all spontaneously just put their hands on his name and began to cry. It was a very powerful moment for us all. But it's all about trying to go to where people are, excluded people who have had trauma, racism, shame, and blame, and indifference. Connecting with them, becoming a human to them, being vulnerable, and letting people know that, we can't solve all the problems, but we're with you in them. And that it makes us better when you accept us into your lives as well. It's really about love. I know that's not a typical medical term, but it's a really powerful underlying philosophy. And you find when you allow yourself to work with folks in this fashion that you heal yourselves. Our movement has grown. These are all programs that use the name street medicine or do our kind of work that we know. And so we created an annual meeting. Our next international symposium is in Toronto next October, so I'm hoping to see many of you there. The Street Medicine Institute was founded in 2009 to be able to coordinate and to help communities start improve street medicine programs. And I'll leave you with the actual full script of that Go to the People. It's attributed to Lao Tzu. Go to the people, live among them, love them, serve them. Start with where they are and build on what they have. But when the best leaders, when the work is accomplished, the people will say, we ourselves have done this. And so you see, we have to extend ourselves into the fabric of our communities, listen to people, work with them. And when it's all done, people will be empowered in that partnership to take their own lives back and improve their own health. I always love when folks on the street remind me things like, don't forget to smile. There's much joy in this work, even though there's a lot of difficulty. This is my homage to the Sisters of Mercy, who has supported us all these years. And that's our website for streetmedicine.org. So I gave you a little journey there, and I hope it's at least a basis for the discussion by the wonderful experts that we have, and I'd be happy to answer questions if there are any.
Thank you so much, Dr. Withers, for that presentation and the work that you do and those tremendous photographs. Before I formally introduce the panelists, we did get a few questions for you in advance. The first one is, when we think of street medicine, we often focus on the body and not necessarily the mind. And I was hoping you could explain a bit about how psychiatry fits into the overall model of care that you provide.
Yeah, I think one of the greatest, probably the biggest waiting room for mental health services is the streets. Probably the criminal justice system is larger, but certainly it's a travesty. All the people who are with untreated mental health problems and supports just because they aren't coming to our offices or they're not a part of our structures. And people are dying. And so I think one of the great imperatives that we have is to try to get out there and provide that kind of mental health right where people are, because they'll freeze to death or they'll kill themselves or whatever else they'll be taken advantage of. And so the field of street psychiatry, I think, is coming up fast. We have new leaders. I'm looking forward to seeing your work there in Toronto, but there are darn few street psychiatrists in the world. And we have a street psychiatry program here in Pittsburgh now with Western Psychiatric Institute. One of our board members is a street psychiatrist in the Institute. So it's a big question. It's a big can of worms to open up there. But if I had three wishes, I think that would be one of them, is that street psychiatry could become a really well-supported, and psychology and all the supports that people need are so critical, and people are dying without it.
It's a huge question and something that we desperately need in Toronto as well. The second question that we had in advance was, pregnancy is a difficult and frightening time for women at the best of times. And I wanted you to explain a little bit how you provide care for women during and after pregnancy.
Yes. That's a really, really good example of how the streets began to teach us. Because when we began to think about, as we got more clinicians together to talk about what we were doing, we said, well, who's at the highest risk? And women with pregnancy were right up there at the very top of that. And so you had to figure out, well, how do we work with that? How do we work with folks? They also had very profound trust issues and conditions. They might have been in a controlling relationship. They might have been in the throes of addiction. And so we prioritize folks like pregnant women and really spend a lot of time getting close and getting that trust. With that, we then apply a relationship that works for them. And usually it's a woman that can help begin to really check in with them very frequently, with prenatal vitamins, all the things that they need, and then escort them physically to their appointments. We have spies in a lot of the health system here who are willing to take our patients at the drop of a hat. You have to kind of work on that. But definitely for women who are pregnant, it's a very incredible time when they may feel the worst despair, but they also feel some of the greatest hope. And so it's a moment when change is really possible. And we've seen so many good things come from focusing on them and supporting them the way they deserve.
I'm sure there are probably many, many stories we could get into. I do want to make sure that we get to our panelists, so I'm just going to introduce our group. We have Dr. Tom Ungar. He's psychiatrist in chief at St. Michael's Hospital and professor of psychiatry at U of T. His work focuses on combating mental illness and substance use structural stigma in healthcare and designing a better, more accessible mental healthcare system that puts the needs of patients first. Dr. Steve Mateus is a child and adolescent psychiatrist, a clinical assistant professor at the University of British Columbia. He's also the founder of Providence Healthcare's award-winning Inner City Youth Program, which provides mental health services to homeless youth and spends much of his time as the executive director of Foundry's BC Life Care for Youth, which provides virtual care, counseling services, and support, and a network of 11, soon to be 19, integrated health and social services center for young people in BC. Onika Dainty is an author and podcaster who spent a year in psychiatric institutions due to psychotic episodes brought on by bipolar affective disorder 1. Growing up in a household that did not discuss mental health care, it took Onika years to seek out the right treatment. Today, she hosts a podcast called Dainty Dish that discusses mental health issues and aims to end the stigma surrounding mental illness. She's also a graduate of the Star Learning Center program at St. Michael's Hospital. Last but not least, we have Dr. Michaela Beder, a psychiatrist at St. Michael's Hospital and the mental health lead with Inner City Health Associates. She works with people living with severe mental illness, homelessness, legal issues, and substance use, and sees people wherever they are, including their homes, in shelters, and on the street. And welcome to all of our panelists. Submitted in advance, and we're going to start with Dr. Mateus. Your work centers around helping youth experiencing homelessness. What are some of the reasons young people have to come and access your services, and how do you work with them to build trust and provide the care they need?
Thanks, Emily. And just before I get started, I just wanted to thank Dr. Withers for a fantastic presentation. Thanks, Jim, for that. In British Columbia, we've had street psychiatry now since 2009. And so we've had psychiatrists at St. Paul's Hospital reaching out not only on the streets, but also to young people. We recognized very early on that this was a missed segment of the homeless population. Approximately 1 in 3 of homeless folks are thought to be under the age of 29. And what we've learned really is that homelessness in Canada anyway starts early. And the stories that we hear are often that young people are homeless starting at the age of 13, 14. And it might be a subtle homelessness, but it's often couch surfing at a friend's or an aunt's house. By the age of 15, 16, they may be in a abusive relationship or may have struggles with their mental health and substance use. As we know, mental health issues strike 1 in 5 young people, and substance use 1 in 4 by the age of 20. So it's just, we know that it starts early, and most of our services are not designed for upstream prevention and early intervention. We don't focus really the resources that we need to focus on 16 to 19-year-olds, which I think is a real detriment to our society. And so what we have found is that having intensive case management teams that try to provide wraparound care dedicated to working with young people and really starting to address the policy issues where we have significant gaps when a young person turns 19, where they go from the child welfare system to the adult chasm, as we call it, is really critical if we're going to start to shift the homelessness issue in our country.
Yeah, that's definitely an extremely important issue that should be resolved, one would hope, in the immediate future. Dr. Beder, today in Toronto, 27 names were added to Toronto's Homeless Memorial. I mean, we're going to be talking about mental health and how it's obviously, a barrier to housing or keeping housing. But I was hoping you could talk a little bit about some of the broader systemic issues that mean that people aren't able to find and keep a safe place to live.
I mean, I think we live in a wealthy society that has many resources, and we need to be doing better at all levels of government, at the federal level, at the provincial level, at the municipal level, to ensure that there is access to housing for people who are experiencing homelessness. And by that, I think we need to have very affordable housing. Some of it needs to have supports in place, while others needs to be out in the community. And I think along with increased access to housing for people, we also need to see an increase in social assistance rates. I work with people every day who would love to have a home and who desperately need a home for both of their physical and mental health, and are just absolutely unable to find one within the income and within their means. And so I think we really are at a crisis point and need to look at these systemic solutions.
Just to follow up on the rates, I mean, are you talking about, it's not just social assistance, but also people who are on ODSP? They're also unable to find a home that is affordable based on those existing rates.
Absolutely. I mean, most of the people who I support and I work with are on ODSP, which is the Provincial Disability Program. And I think that especially during COVID, but even before that time, it's just not enough to survive on. I think that a lot of people end up using food banks. My clients tell me that they don't have enough to eat by the end of the month. And so if you're struggling to feed yourself, then there's absolutely no possibility that you're going to find housing that's dignified and that can maintain your physical and your mental health on that income.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Ungar, so mental health, still carries so much stigma with it and the potential to cause so much harm, and not just to individuals, but society at large. And I was hoping you could explain a little bit about what systemic stigma is as it relates to mental health and keeping people trapped in poverty.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. And thank you, Dr. Withers, for the fabulous presentation. We're hearing a lot about this idea of systemic bias, structural bias. It's a bit of a weird concept, mostly related right now to gender inequities and significantly about ethno-racial inequities being the thing. In some work I'm doing with the Mental Health Commission of Canada, we're really focusing not just on the interpersonal stigma of how you distance yourself from a person because you're fearful or don't understand their health condition, if it's a mental health or substance use condition, but actually the way it's considered in terms of legitimacy. We tend to divide the mind and the body. So even conceptually, there's a structural difference. And the mind stuff, which is where the mental health and substance use disorders got stuck, is sort of not equitably considered to the tangible body stuff, the concrete physical health, mental and physical health. And the sad part about that is that inequity goes right downstream. So a significant portion of our homeless population, as part of their health conditions, have mental health conditions and substance use disorders. And I'm always struck by the fact that we tolerate them being homeless and unhoused due to a health condition, where we don't do that with some physical health conditions. We had someone's wonderful, sweet grandparent or elderly parent go wandering this previous winter in Toronto. There was an Amber Alert. There was a media frenzy. The community mobilized to go searching. Within 12 hours, they found him. It was all over the media. Everyone was relieved. One person, because that brain condition is considered neurology, real medicine, physical. On the other hand, you may have a person with a severe, serious mental health condition or severe substance use disorder. No Amber Alert, no media frenzy, no community mobilization. In fact, it's tolerated. And the reality is a significant portion of our homeless population, not all, but some of them, may be people with these types of health conditions. So when I look out to our homeless population, I'm just struck by the structural, systemic misconception, not just allegation, but misconception of it as being also the homelessness, the health, the policy, and our conception and our empathy that's comes from that attribution is all really built together. So that's the upstream policy thing that strikes me, and how we can integrate all those services, the housing, with the health understanding, with the legal and policy things. That's the thing, I think, a way forward.
Just to follow a bit on that, I mean, mental health conditions are recognized as medical disorders. And where do you think the disconnect comes, or why do we view one population of people who are dealing with a medical issue as, to use my words, more disposable than, say, people suffering from physical illnesses like cancer?
Yeah, so thank you. So thank you for recognizing us as physicians in the same way. I only say that as a joke because I started out as a family doctor and worked for 2 years, and had Eastern European immigrant parents. So when I returned to tell them I'm going to be a specialist, they go, "Oh, specialist, how wonderful." And then they said, what kind of specialty? I said, psychiatry. And their faces went down. So thank you for recognizing. Believe it or not, it goes back to this old philosophical Rene Descartes mind-body split that continues to permeate through everything. Why we have separate mental health policy versus health policy. It's just such a deep implicit bias, just like the other structural implicit biases. That's the focus we're getting at, because it is health condition, but it's not so easy to see. You don't have a skin rash or a cast on your arm. So as we embed all the health together, all the physical health needs of our homeless persons, along with all the other mental health, whatever we call them, we're going to be better off for it.
I mean, thank you for that. And we're going to go to Onika, and she's got this incredible podcast called Daily Dish. And coming from a journalism perspective, what I thought was essential and the most important way to tell these stories and reduce stigma was through the voices of people with lived experience, because they're the people that have actually tried to access and use systems that are supposed to support all of us. And Onika, I just want to talk a bit about, what having your own platform has been like, what it's meant to you, and what it's meant to your guests in terms of trying to reduce the stigma around mental health issues.
Just a quick correction. It's Dainty Dish after my last name. Don't worry about it. It has meant so much to me to have this podcast. I mean, 4 years ago, I started off actually as a patient of St. Michael's Hospital. I'm in the psychiatric unit. And from there, through self-advocacy and the support of the team inpatient, I was able to secure housing. I was able to start with Star Learning Center, which I am a graduate of. That is an Odette family initiative. So thank you so much to the Odette family for that initiative. After graduating from that program, I became a peer support worker. And part of peer support work is having that lived experience. I had that support when I was within the hospital. There was a peer support worker there that actually guided me through my mental health journey, and I knew that's something that I wanted to do. So in combination with peer support work, I started my podcast, and my podcast basically just gives people opportunities to share their lived experience story. It's so important to hear what people with lived experience have to say about mental health and the system and how we live and how things go about in this system and how it affects us personally. So having that platform and being able to share those stories with people is vitally important to my recovery, to my mental health, and to theirs as well.
Can you just tell me a little bit, just to expand on, what is it like for the people that you're interviewing? If you could sort of describe how the experience impacts them to have a platform.
To start off, they can be very nervous to start because it's a very hard thing to tell your story. I'm an advocate, my mental health advocate, just in life in general. So I share my story constantly with anyone who will listen, basically. But some people are a lot shyer. They're a little bit more introverted when it comes to telling their story. But they find when they're on the podcast, it's the ease of it's a conversational podcast. We try to have conversations that take people beyond the stigma. And once we let them know that's our objective, that's our main goal, they're so open and they're so honest with their stories, and they feel like it's a cathartic experience, and it opens them up to the possibility of sharing their stories with other people. So I think it's a great experience that they have when they're on the podcast.
I can definitely tell that you are super easy to talk to, or definitely you would put people at ease. I just wanted to go back to Dr. Withers for a second. At the beginning, you talked about, someone with lived experience was sort of your gateway into the medical care that you were providing. As part of your current practice, do you still incorporate people with lived experience as sort of part of the team, or how does that work for you?
Well, we're fortunate to have always had people in the program with lived experience. It's not always easy because our parent organization has, requirements for this and that and the other. And there's also a lot of danger to people when they're not fully recovered. You can often put people in a position where they're helping others and it's incredible what they can do, but sometimes they get ahead of their own recovery. And we've lost a number of people to crises, relapse, and things like that. The folks in Boston have a really pretty good protocol for allowing people to have a certain way to join the program in such a way that it doesn't jeopardize them. I wish we did better here in Pittsburgh. We do as well as I think we can at this point. But I think street medicine in general needs to incorporate more community health workers, more people with lived experience, not just in the work, but also in advisory boards where, and I'd be curious if Anika has any formal feedback with the health system where she and others could let you all know how you're doing. Because I think we hear people day to day, but we don't hear maybe the voice of the people as to how those services could be reshaped or improved. So one of the things that we're all pushing for, one of our Street Medicine Institute board members is a wonderful guy with lived experience, is to have that voice in the shaping of the future of how we do the work.
I mean, Onika, that's a huge question, but back to you. Is there something in particular you wanted to point out?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Withers. And I did want to thank you for your speech as well. It was amazing. And thank you, Emily. I would say mental health we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do. I would say that my experiences, I didn't feel until I got the right level of mental health care that I was listened to, that I was heard. It took 7 episodes and a year and a half of my life spent in psychiatric institutions for my voice to finally be heard and for me to get the level of care that I needed to survive. I am also on disability, so there's an aspect of stigma when it comes to people on disability and services that are provided. Living in Toronto, the services are a lot more than where I used to live out in the Durham region, but there's still a lot of work to do. And what I find is, personally, it seems like it's like an umbrella with broken stems. Like the stems on the umbrella, there's supposed to be this hub where people are supposed to be able to go to get mental health care, referrals, whatever that may look like. But these spikes on the umbrella are broken. So they're not connected. So they're not opening up and allowing people to come under that shelter and actually find some kind of help in their mental health. It needs to get so serious that you end up hospitalized. And within that system, there's a whole other scenarios that go on within the mental health care system. I've been in situations in hospitals where I've had to deal with people who are not necessarily educated about how to handle people in a psychotic crisis. So security can be an issue. There are different things that can be issues. And then leaving that environment and just being pushed out into the world and saying, okay, well, good luck. We don't really have anything. Here's a book or here's a pamphlet. It's a struggle. It can be a struggle. I just think that mental health has a lot of work to do. I've done some collaborations in the last couple of years where there's mental health workbooks available now that are becoming available for people in the front lines. So that's positive, but I just think we have a lot of work to do.
No, and I mean, thank you for that. Well, one, for sharing bits of your story here and the work that you do. And it really would honestly be impossible, coming from my perspective, to unpack any of the systems that I try to write about without people like you who are willing to break down the nuts and bolts and what it actually is like to go through that process, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We did have one question submitted, and I'm going to put it to Dr. Beder. And that was, what is the largest obstacle that you face when it comes to local government, when it comes to supporting the outreach work that you do?
I mean, I think I'll give the same answer I did before, because I think that, I work on incredible teams with really, really good outreach workers, interdisciplinary teams with all sorts of supports. And I think we're, doing a lot of work to bring care to where people are at. I think we always need more. At the same time, all of this is in the service of supporting somebody to live their best life possible. And, all the workers in the world aren't able to house somebody if there isn't sufficient housing. And I think oftentimes the housing that we do find for people is not dignified for their health. There are a lot of really, really difficult situations that people end up living in. And so it often, to me, feels that we are, doing our best to mitigate the circumstances that people are in, but not actually able to provide all of the things that somebody needs in order to live their best life possible. And so I really think that There have been announcements recently about funding from the federal government. I think we need to really be looking at providing services housing close to where people's services are. We've seen a lot of housing be pushed out into the further reaches of the Greater Toronto area. And the challenge there is that those services that people need aren't in those same areas. And so I really think we need to be looking at the whole system and at the whole person to ensure that the treatment that they need for substance use, that the supports that they need for their mental health, that their primary care, and then their relationships and their family connections are all supported as best as possible in the place that they wish to live.
Yeah, I mean, we know that one of the true things in this is that if you destabilize people by pushing them to the outskirts of the city where there may be a place for them to live, but their friends aren't there, their services aren't there, they're very likely to quickly lose their housing or, backtrack, and I don't use the word progress, but, perhaps, lose a little bit of the ground that they've gained. To take it back to the West Coast, Dr. Mateus, I wanted to know, how do you manage that when it comes to young people? Or how is it that you sort of walk the line between sort of dealing with families and youth and making sure that they're getting these services and perhaps the housing that they need, if, say, they need to be emancipated?
That's a great question. And I just want to highlight what Dr. Beder was saying is that we've got to take more than a system approach. We need to start taking a community approach. And quite honestly, the way our health and social services are funded in the community were never designed to tackle the type of complexity that we're really needing to tackle. And so we really need to think about this as a community issue, and we need to think about the funding that goes into the community working together instead of being paid out in silos and in streams, where you have a housing stream that doesn't talk to a mental health stream, that doesn't talk to a substance use stream. It's horrific, to be honest. So what we've tried to do here in British Columbia is, at least for the young people, ages 12 to 24, we've been able to break some of these silos down, and now we're starting to have community-led initiatives called Foundry, where the centers that we open, much to what Anika was saying earlier, have all the services in one place. And so instead of having those broken spikes on the umbrella, we're trying to create a nice umbrella similar to the YHU model, the Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario model that's delivered from CAMH in Ontario. But this idea of having a one-stop shop, one place where a young person and their family members can come in, and then being supported to navigate the complexity of the model. And in that model, then you also have housing services, among others, mental health, substance use, and primary care. But I think that's really the way we need to shift, is give the power back to the communities rather than these very top-down, health authority-led type of initiatives.
Thank you for that. We've got about 3.5 minutes. So very quickly, I'm going to ask Dr. Ungar to maybe give me an example of a practical piece or how we could make that connection in community. And then the last one's going to go to Dr. Withers.
Sure, that's an easy one. As I listen to Steve, and really it's this integration, and really right now the system is probably designed from the provider on the inside and then the person receiving the service on the outside. And that's why you get those umbrella spokes. But if you put the person receiving the care on the inside, and what is the need? Sort of like the architects do with, they call this the Bauhaus School of Design, where it's a form follows function design school. So if you looked at what the function was first and then built the form, it would look very different. So integrating the housing need, which is tremendous, with the services need, because the problem is they actually come out separately. The providers are trying to do a good job. No one's against us. Everyone I know is working absolutely to their best as kind people, but the system kind of gets in their way and creates these barriers. So one of the things we have here is we have some wonderful programs like the Catch program. We take homeless people who have come to the hospital who are in need of support in their emerge on our inpatient unit, and right away the housing worker sees them in hospital. We have a special quick access to housing, and they work with them immediately, and they have an office on our hallway in the hospital. So it's that kind of physical and service integration right from the get-go. That would be the kind of solutions we would like to see.
Perfect. And then I think I'll end with Dr. Withers by asking him another giant question. You've got about 30 seconds. I guess I just wanted to say, this has been a really educational experience for me and hopefully for viewers. And I just wanted to know if there was any specific perspectives you wanted to offer on how you practice in Canada, or how you practice in the United States versus how we do this in Canada.
Yes, ironically, Canada is one of the places I've done the least exploring in the world. So I was really frustrated with COVID. So I was planning to get up there and really look at your work. But based on my relationships and comparing notes with folks in Northern Europe, we almost have a Darwinian kind of a mentality down here in the United States. It's very capitalistic, very, brutal. And so I'm sure that many of the same problems are there in terms of the issues that you talked about, silos and breaking those down and wrapping your head around the integration of a person's life. But down here, we're also just struggling to get insurance and fundamental things that really don't even get you up to the beginning of the journey many times. And so, in some ways, it energizes us to have something to fight for, but that's a sad way to look at life. But I'd say that if we could get universal health care and services, especially if they speak to the things that you guys have been talking about so well, making them geared towards integration and putting the people themselves in the driver's seat, I think those are things that would be great for the United States. Again, I'll just go back and say we're all so much looking forward to next October when we'll bring the world to you all and listen to you and hear what you're doing as well.
I hope that you get to come in October, and I hope you get to explore a little bit more in the near future as well. Before we close out, I do need to take a minute to thank the Odette family and the P&L Odette Foundation, whose $10 million gift to St. Michael's in 2013 resulted in the creation of the Louis L. Odette Urban Angel Fund for Homeless People, which supports this Louis L. Odette lecture series. And thank you for all you do. Thank you for all that you do to support the disadvantaged and vulnerable people across our city, of which there are many. And please welcome back Dr. Tom Ungar.
Thank you, Emily, and hi, everybody. On behalf of St. Michael's Hospital and the Odette family, thank you to Dr. Jim Withers for a terrific presentation on the importance of street medicine and mental health care for people experiencing homelessness. I'd also like to thank our panelists, Dr. Mateus, Ms. Dainty, and Dr. Beder for your hard work and your dedication to the issue, and Emily Matthew for facilitating this great conversation. And finally, thank you to all of you for tuning in, and enjoy the rest of your day.